I never imagined I'd be here spilling my guts to strangers, but life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. My name's Chris. I'm 37, married to Sarah, 35, for 8 years. We've got 2 kids, Liam, 6, and Emma, 4, and until recently, I thought we had a rock-solid marriage. I'm not saying we were perfect, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. It all started a few months ago. At first, it was subtle. Sarah became different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the woman I knew, the woman I'd built a life with, wasn't the same. We've always been a team, sharing the workload with the kids, juggling careers, and still managing to carve out time for each other. But suddenly, Sarah seemed like she was in a different world, one I wasn't part of. It started with her appearance. Sarah's always been naturally beautiful, but she was never one to fuss over her looks. She was a throw on jeans and a hoodie kind of person, and I loved that about her. But then she started buying expensive clothes, designer bags, and perfumes that cost more than our monthly grocery bill. She'd get her hair done every couple of weeks, and her nails became this constant rotating display of perfect colors and designs. At first I thought, good for her. I mean, everyone deserves to feel good about themselves, right? She'd always been self-conscious after having the kids, so I figured maybe she just wanted to feel confident again. I even complimented her, told her she looked amazing. But then it started feeling excessive. She started going out more, claiming she had work dinners, networking events, and late-night team meetings. I didn't question it at first. Sarah's always been ambitious, and her career in marketing can be demanding. But these meetings started happening 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, and they stretched later and later into the night. She'd come home smelling like expensive wine and a cologne that wasn't hers. The first time I brought it up, she laughed it off. Chris, you're overthinking it. These are just work dinners. Do you want me to stop being successful? Of course I didn't. I trusted her. At least I wanted to. But then there was the phone. Sarah has always been attached to her phone, like most people, but this was different. It became a permanent extension of her hand. She started keeping it on silent, and always face down. She'd take it with her everywhere, into the bathroom, out to the mailbox, even into the backyard to play with the kids. One night I noticed her giggling at a text. I asked her what was so funny, and she gave me this dismissive little smile. Oh, just work stuff, she said. My team's hilarious. When I pressed her, she got defensive. What's with the 3rd degree, Chris? Do you not trust me? I backed off. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, the one who interrogates his wife over every little thing. But the more I tried to push the doubts down, the more they grew. It wasn't just the phone. Sarah started withdrawing from me in other ways too. She'd always been my biggest supporter, my partner in everything. But now, she seemed distant, distracted. We'd sit down to watch a movie, and she'd be glued to her phone the entire time. Our conversations became shorter, more surface level, like she didn't want to open up to me anymore. The tipping point came one Saturday afternoon. Sarah was getting ready for another work dinner, and I was helping Liam and Emma with their Legos in the living room. She walked in wearing a tight black dress I'd never seen before, with her hair and makeup done like she was heading to some gala, not a business dinner. You look incredible, I said, trying to keep the jealousy out of my voice. Thanks, she said, barely looking at me. As she walked out the door, Liam tugged on my sleeve. Why does Mommy dress like that for work but not for us? It broke my heart. That night, I decided to check her calendar. Sarah and I had always shared our schedules, something we started doing when the kids were born to keep track of appointments and work events. But when I opened the app, I saw that all her work dinners were conveniently missing. I confronted her about it the next morning. Hey, why aren't your work dinners on the calendar anymore? She barely flinched. Oh, I stopped using that app. It's just easier to keep everything in my head. It felt rehearsed, like she'd been expecting the question. By now, the doubts were impossible to ignore. Sarah was hiding something big. But I didn't know what, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. The night I discovered the truth started like any other. Sarah had another work dinner, and I was home with the kids, trying to convince Liam that bedtime didn't have to be a full-blown battle. By the time I finally got both kids to sleep, it was almost 9 p.m. I poured myself a drink, sat on the couch, and stared at my phone, debating whether to call her. I wasn't planning to accuse her of anything. I just wanted to hear her voice, maybe convince myself that everything was fine. But when I called, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. That sinking feeling in my gut came roaring back, but I told myself she was probably just in a noisy restaurant, or her phone had died. Then I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey man. You don't know me, but I think you should check out the Blackstone Bar. Your wife's here, and it doesn't look like a work dinner." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't know whether to believe it, but something about the message felt real. I replied, asking who they were, but they didn't answer. After a few minutes of pacing the living room, I called my neighbor, Karen, and asked if she could come over to watch the kids for a little while. She didn't ask questions, just said she'd be right over. By the time I got to the Blackstone Bar, my hands were shaking. It was one of those upscale places with dim lighting and soft jazz music, the kind of place Sarah had started frequenting lately. I walked in, scanning the room, and then I saw her. She was sitting in a corner booth, laughing, her hand on someone's arm. It wasn't just anyone, though. It was Jake, my best friend since we were kids, the guy who'd been at my wedding, who had toasted to our everlasting love, with a glass of champagne in hand. At first, I thought maybe I was seeing things. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe they were having a totally innocent conversation. But then Sarah leaned in, whispering something in Jake's ear, and he smiled in a way that made my stomach turn. Then she touched his face, letting her hand linger a little too long. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My vision blurred, and I thought I might throw up. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. This was my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, cheating on me with my best friend. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march over there and blow the whole thing up, but the other part of me was frozen. I just stood there, watching them, feeling like my whole life was crumbling around me. Finally, I turned and walked out. I didn't trust myself to confront them in that moment. I was too angry, too hurt. I needed time to process what I'd just seen. When I got home, Karen asked if everything was okay. I lied and said it was, thanked her for watching the kids, and collapsed onto the couch as soon as she left. My mind was racing. A million thoughts hit me at once. How long had this been going on? Was it just Jake, or had there been others? Did she even care about me anymore? About our family? I sat there in the dark for hours, replaying the scene over and over in my head, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. By the time Sarah came home, I'd made up my mind. I was going to confront her, no matter how painful it was. I heard the door open around 1 a.m. The sound of Sarah's heels clicking on the hardwood floor made my stomach churn. She walked into the living room, startled to see me sitting there in the dark, nursing a drink. "Hey," she said, trying to sound casual. "You're up late." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, taking in every detail. The way her makeup was still perfectly intact, the faint smell of that perfume she'd bought recently, and the traces of someone else's cologne clinging to her. "How was your work dinner?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could manage. She paused for just a second, but it was enough for me to catch it. "It was fine. Long but fine. Why are you still up?" I set my glass down and leaned forward. "You were at the Blackstone tonight, weren't you?" Her eyes widened for a split second before she quickly recovered. "What? No, why would you think that? Don't lie to me, Sarah." "I was there. I saw you. I saw you with Jake." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but then her expression hardened. "Okay, fine. Yes, I was there. But it's not what you think, Chris. Not what I think, I said, my voice rising. I saw you touching him, whispering in his ear, laughing like he's the best thing that's ever happened to you. So please, Sarah, explain to me how it's not what I think. She crossed her arms, her defensiveness kicking in. It's complicated. Jake's been going through a rough time with Emily, and he needed someone to talk to. I was just being there for him. That's all it was. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think I didn't see the way you looked at him? How long has this been going on? Weeks? Months? Chris, stop, she snapped. You're overreacting. You're making this into something it's not. Oh, really? Then why the lies? Why the secrecy? Why all the late nights and the excuses and the perfume and… I stopped myself, my voice cracking. You're sleeping with him, aren't you? She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, glaring at me like I was the one at fault. Finally she said, You know what? Fine. Yes. I've been seeing Jake. Are you happy now? It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing her admit it out loud shattered me. Are you serious right now? I said, my voice trembling. You've been sneaking around with my best friend? The guy I've known since I was a kid? How could you do this to me? To our family? She rolled her eyes, and that's when I saw it. The Sarah I thought I knew was gone. In her place was someone cold, someone unrecognizable. Oh, spare me the guilt trip, Chris. You're not exactly Mr. Perfect either. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I asked, stunned. You've been so checked out lately. All you care about is work and the kids. You don't make me feel special anymore. Jake actually listens to me. He makes me feel alive again. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to blow up our marriage and our family? I said. That's your solution? She shrugged, like it didn't even matter. Maybe our marriage was already broken. You just didn't see it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman I'd spent years building a life with. I stood up, unable to look at her anymore. I hope he's worth it, I said quietly. Because I'm done. She didn't try to stop me as I walked out of the room. She didn't apologize or show even a shred of regret. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching me leave. That night, I slept in the guest room. Or at least I tried to. But the anger, the betrayal, the sheer disbelief of it all kept me awake. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. That night was the longest night of my life. I lay on the stiff guest room bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage over and over again, looking for signs I might have missed. The betrayal was like a knife in my chest that kept twisting every time I thought about it. My wife. My best friend. Two people I trusted more than anyone in the world. And they had destroyed everything. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe this was just a phase. Maybe she was going through some kind of midlife crisis or emotional struggle that I didn't understand. But then her words echoed in my head. Jake actually listens to me. He makes me feel alive again. She didn't just cheat, she chose him, and she didn't even try to deny it. I felt sick. My stomach churned, and my chest felt like it was caving in. I thought about Liam and Emma. What would this mean for them? They adored their mother, and Jake, for that matter. The thought of tearing their world apart made me feel like a failure. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay in the house. The sight of Sarah going about her morning routine as if nothing had happened would have driven me insane. I got up early, threw on some clothes, and went for a drive. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get away. The kids were still asleep, and Sarah, well, she didn't seem to care. She didn't come to the guest room to check on me. She didn't text me to ask where I was. It was like she'd already made her choice, and I was just a complication she didn't feel like dealing with anymore. I ended up at a park a few miles from our house. It was quiet, almost deserted, with just a couple of joggers and dog walkers passing by. I sat on a bench, staring out at the empty playground, and tried to wrap my head around everything. The anger came in waves. I'd think about Jake, his smug face, his stupid jokes, the way he always acted like he was part of my family, and I wanted to punch something. How long had this been going on? How many times had he sat across from me at dinner, knowing what he was doing behind my back? And then there was Sarah. How could she do this to me? To our kids? To the life we'd built together? I thought about all the times I'd defended her when people said she was too bossy or demanding. I thought about the nights I stayed up with the kids so she could rest, the sacrifices I made at work so she could advance her career. I gave her everything, and this was how she repaid me? But underneath the anger was something worse, pain. Deep, soul-crushing pain. I loved her. Despite everything, I still loved her. And that made it hurt even more. I sat there for hours, lost in my thoughts, until my phone buzzed. It was Karen, my neighbor. She must have seen me leave that morning. "Hey, just checking in. Are you okay? If you need to talk, I'm here." I almost didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. But then I realized I couldn't do this alone. "I'm not okay," I texted back. "Can I come over?" She replied almost immediately. "Of course. Anytime." When I got to Karen's house, she ushered me inside, handed me a cup of coffee, and sat me down at her kitchen table. She didn't push me to talk right away, which I appreciated. Finally, after a few minutes of silence, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face a mix of shock and sympathy. When I finished, she shook her head. "Chris, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Sarah always seemed so, together." "Yeah," I said bitterly. "So did Jake." "What are you going to do?" she asked gently. That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I couldn't stay in that house, but I couldn't just walk away from my kids either. Divorce felt like a nuclear option, but how could I even begin to fix something that broken? "I don't know," I admitted. "I really don't." Karen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you. And if you need a lawyer, I know someone really good." The mention of a lawyer made my stomach turn. I wasn't ready for that yet. But it was comforting to know I had someone in my corner. When I left Karen's house, I felt a little calmer, but the weight of what had happened was still crushing me. I knew I had to face Sarah again, but I didn't know how to even begin that conversation. When I got back to the house, it was eerily quiet. Liam and Emma were playing in the backyard, their laughter ringing out through the open windows. For a moment, I stood in the driveway, just listening to them, wondering how the hell I was supposed to shield them from the storm that was brewing. I walked inside, and there she was, Sarah, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, casually sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. She looked up when she heard the door close and gave me this awkward, forced smile. "You're back," she said. "I was wondering where you went." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at her. She fidgeted under my gaze, closing her laptop and crossing her arms like she was bracing for whatever was coming next. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. She sighed, like this whole thing was just an inconvenience for her. "Chris, I don't want to keep fighting. Can we just move past this?" "Move past this?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think we can just sweep this under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen? You slept with my best friend, Sarah. You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. And now you want to act like it's no big deal?" Her face hardened. "I already told you why it happened. You were checked out, Chris. You made me feel invisible. Jake was there for me when you weren't." I felt the anger bubbling up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And that justifies what you did? Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to destroy everything we built together? Do you even care about this family?" "Of course I care," she snapped. "But I can't undo what's already happened. What do you want me to say, Chris? That I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. But we can't go back in time. Her apology felt hollow, like she was just saying the words to get me off her back. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice breaking. Do you even want to fix this, Sarah? Or are you just waiting for me to give up so you can run off with Jake? She hesitated, and that hesitation was like a dagger to the heart. I don't know, she admitted quietly. I don't know what I want right now. That was it. That was the moment I realized she wasn't fighting for us. She wasn't fighting for our marriage, for our family. She was too wrapped up in whatever fantasy she'd created with Jake to see what she was throwing away. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. If you don't know what you want, then I can't keep fighting for this on my own. I need to think about what's best for me and the kids. She didn't respond, just stared down at her coffee cup like it held the answers she didn't have. I spent the rest of the day avoiding her, focusing on the kids instead. Liam and Emma were my anchor in all of this. Their smiles, their laughter, they were the only thing keeping me sane. But even as I played with them in the backyard, the reality of the situation loomed over me like a storm cloud. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I called Karen. I think I need that lawyer's number, I said, my voice heavy. She didn't hesitate. I'll text it to you right now. The next morning, I made the call. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, listened patiently as I told her everything. She didn't sugarcoat anything, which I appreciated. You're going to have to make some tough decisions, she said. But the most important thing is protecting your kids and your financial stability. Have you spoken to Sarah about separating? Not yet, I admitted. But I think it's inevitable. Take your time, she said. But don't wait too long. The sooner we start preparing, the better. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. I'd always thought divorce was something that happened to other people, not me. But now, it felt like the only option. That evening, I sat Sarah down in the living room. We need to talk about separating, I said, my voice firm. She looked at me, startled. Separating? Chris, don't you think that's a little drastic? No, Sarah, I said, cutting her off. What's drastic is what you did. What's drastic is tearing apart our family because you decided I wasn't enough for you. I can't keep living like this, and I won't let the kids grow up in a house where there's nothing but resentment and betrayal. For once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Fear? Fine, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. If that's what you want. It's not what I want, I said, standing up. But it's what I need. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the anger or the endless questions rattling around in my head. It was Liam and Emma. How do you explain to two little kids that their entire world is about to change? That the family they know and love will never be the same? The morning after my conversation with Sarah, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out the window, trying to figure out how I was going to do this. The kids were too young to understand the full story, but I also couldn't just pack my bags and leave without an explanation. They deserved something, some kind of reassurance that, no matter what, I wasn't abandoning them. Sarah and I decided to tell them together. Well, I decided, and she begrudgingly agreed. We sat them down on the couch that afternoon, with Liam holding his favorite action figure and Emma clutching her stuffed bunny. They looked up at us with those innocent eyes, completely oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Mommy and Daddy need to talk to you about something. I started, my voice steady but heavy. You know how sometimes grown-ups don't always get along? Well, Mommy and I have been having a hard time, and we think it's best if we spend some time apart. Emma's little face scrunched up in confusion. What does that mean? She asked, clutching her bunny tighter. It means that Daddy is going to live somewhere else for a little while, I said, forcing a smile. But I'll still see you both all the time. This doesn't change how much I love you. Liam's bottom lip quivered, and I could see the questions forming in his head. But why, Daddy? Did we do something wrong? That broke me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. No, buddy. This isn't because of you or Emma. This is just something between Mommy and me. It's not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault. Sarah sat there, silent, letting me do all the talking. I could feel the resentment bubbling up again, but I pushed it down. This moment wasn't about her or me, it was about the kids. Liam nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. How could he? He was 6 years old. To him, Mommy and Daddy were supposed to be together forever. Emma, on the other hand, climbed into my lap and hugged me tight. Don't go, Daddy, she whispered, her little voice breaking my heart all over again. I held her close, my throat tightening. I'll always be here for you, Em. I promise. The next few days were a blur of packing and logistical planning. Sarah and I agreed that I'd move out temporarily while we figured out the next steps. I found a small apartment a few miles away, close enough to the kids so I could see them regularly but far enough that I didn't have to face Sarah every day. The day I left was surreal. I loaded up my car with a couple of suitcases and some essentials, trying to ignore the weight in my chest. The kids stood on the front porch with Sarah, waving goodbye as if I were going on a business trip. They didn't fully understand, and maybe that was a blessing. I waved back, forcing a smile, but as I drove away, the tears finally came. The apartment was small and bare, with beige walls and a carpet that had seen better days. It was a far cry from the home I'd built with Sarah, but it was mine. For the first time in years I was alone. No kids running around, no Sarah in the next room, no noise. Just silence. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night, staring at the blank walls, and let it all hit me. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, the uncertainty of what came next. I'd never felt so lost in my life. But as I sat there, I realized something else. I'd survived. As broken as I felt, I was still standing. And if I could get through this, I could get through anything. The next day, I called the lawyer, Linda, to let her know I was ready to move forward. Let's talk custody, I said. My kids are my priority. The first meeting with Linda was a wake-up call. She was direct, no nonsense, and exactly what I needed. As I sat across from her in her sleek, minimalist office, she pulled no punches. Chris, the first thing we need to establish is custody, she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. From what you've told me, you're prioritizing Liam and Emma, which is good. But you need to be realistic. Shared custody is the default in most cases unless there's a serious reason to argue otherwise. I nodded, though my stomach twisted at the thought of sharing my kids with Sarah after everything she'd done. I want what's best for them, I said. I just don't know what that looks like right now. We'll figure it out, Linda said, her tone firm but reassuring. In the meantime, we need to set some clear boundaries with your wife. If you're serious about separating, she needs to understand that your co-parenting relationship doesn't mean she can manipulate or control you. The word manipulate hit me harder than I expected. Sarah had always been the type to push boundaries, to twist situations to her advantage. I realized I'd let her get away with it for far too long. Linda gave me a list of things to work on, documenting interactions, keeping track of my time with the kids, and making sure I had copies of all financial documents. It felt overwhelming, but it also gave me a sense of control, something I hadn't felt since this whole mess started. When I left her office, I called Sarah. I wasn't looking forward to the conversation, but I knew it was necessary. Hey, I said when she answered. Her voice was clipped, as if she were expecting a fight. What's up? She asked. I just wanted to let you know that I met with a lawyer today, I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. I think it's time we start figuring out the logistics of the separation. Custody, finances, all of it. There was a long pause. You've already got a lawyer? She asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Chris, don't you think you're moving a little fast? Fast? I said, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. Sarah, you've been having an affair with my best friend for months. The fact that I didn't pack my bags the second I found out is about as slow as it gets. She sighed. I don't want this to get messy. It's already messy, I said. But if you're willing to cooperate, we can at least keep it from getting worse. She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost resigned. Fine. Just let me know what I need to do. That night, I drafted an email with Linda's help, outlining some initial agreements, temporary custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, and boundaries for communication. I sent it to Sarah and made it clear that these were just the first steps, not the final say. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and tough conversations. Sarah and I agreed to a temporary custody schedule where I had the kids 3 nights a week and alternate weekends. It wasn't ideal, but it gave me a sense of stability, and more importantly, it gave the kids a sense of routine. Jake, surprisingly, stayed out of the picture during this time. Whether that was out of guilt or because Sarah had told him to back off, I didn't know and didn't care. I was done worrying about him. My focus was on Liam and Emma, on rebuilding my life and figuring out what kind of future I wanted for myself and my kids. Setting boundaries with Sarah was harder than I expected. She had this way of trying to slip back into old habits, calling me to talk about things that had nothing to do with the kids, or texting me late at night with random questions. At first, I answered out of politeness, but it quickly became clear that she wasn't respecting the new dynamic. One night, she called me around 10 p.m. I hesitated before answering, but eventually picked up. What's up, Sarah? I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, she said, her voice shaky. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Sarah, if you're having doubts, that's something you need to figure out on your own. I'm not your emotional support system anymore. She was silent for a moment, and then she said, You're really done with me, aren't you? I took a deep breath. You made your choice, Sarah. Now I'm making mine. From that point on, I made a rule. Communication with Sarah would only happen through text or email unless it was about the kids. It was hard at first. Part of me still wanted to cling to the life we had, even if I knew it was over. But I knew it was the only way to truly move forward. The first few weeks after setting those boundaries were some of the hardest I've ever faced. The silence that filled my new apartment was deafening. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. No kids running through the house, no laughter, no chaos, just me and my thoughts. And those thoughts weren't kind. I questioned everything. How had I let this happen? Had I been a bad husband? Was I so wrapped up in work and the kids that I'd missed all the signs? There were moments I even wondered if I should have fought harder to save the marriage. But every time I thought about Sarah and Jake together, any doubts vanished. What kept me going was Liam and Emma. On the nights I had them, the apartment came alive. It wasn't much, a small 2-bedroom place with hand-me-down furniture, but we made it ours. I let them pick out new bedding and posters for their rooms, and we spent hours decorating with cheap string lights and art supplies. Liam loved showing off his new man cave to anyone who'd listen. Daddy's place is awesome, he told Karen one afternoon when she dropped off some homemade cookies. Hearing that made all the difference. But even with the kids as my anchor, the road to rebuilding my life wasn't easy. Financially, I had to adjust. Splitting our finances with Sarah meant cutting back on luxuries. But honestly, it felt good to focus on what really mattered. I sold some of the things we didn't need anymore, an old treadmill, unused camping gear, and used the money to create a small savings account for emergencies. Emotionally, I leaned on the people who mattered. Karen became my rock during those early days. She'd invite me over for coffee or dinner, and while she never pushed me to talk, she was always there when I needed to vent. She had her own divorce story and gave me practical advice. Take it one day at a time. Some days, it'll feel impossible. But the good days will come back, I promise. I also started therapy. At first, I felt embarrassed admitting I needed help, but my therapist, Dr. Harris, quickly became a lifeline. She helped me sort through the anger, the pain, and the self-doubt. "This isn't your fault, Chris," she told me during one session. "You can't control other people's actions, only how you respond to them." One of the biggest hurdles was running into mutual friends who didn't know the full story. Some of them were clearly uncomfortable, not sure how to approach the topic. Others were surprisingly supportive, offering words of encouragement and telling me they were on my side. The hardest interaction came at a grocery store one afternoon. I was picking up snacks for the kids when I saw Jake. He was in the produce section, casually browsing like he didn't have a care in the world. My stomach turned. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to ask him how he could betray me like that. But I didn't. Instead, I walked right past him, grabbed a bag of apples, and went to check out. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. That night, I told my therapist about the encounter. "It felt good not to engage," I admitted. "Like I finally had control over something." "You're reclaiming your power," Dr. Harris said with a smile. "That's a big step, Chris. Keep going." As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel a shift. The anger was still there, but it didn't consume me the way it used to. I began to focus on the things I could control: my relationship with my kids, my career, and my own happiness. One evening, Liam and Emma were sitting at the kitchen table, coloring pictures while I made dinner. Emma held up her drawing, a stick figure version of our little family, complete with the new apartment in the background. "Look, Daddy," she said proudly. "This is our happy house." I smiled, blinking back tears. "It's perfect, sweetheart." It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Co-parenting with Sarah was as challenging as I'd expected, but it also forced me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. The first few exchanges were tense. She dropped the kids off at my apartment, barely making eye contact, and our conversations were limited to logistical details: pick-up times, doctor's appointments, school schedules. At first, I dreaded these interactions. Seeing her, knowing what she'd done, and pretending to keep it together for the sake of the kids felt like swallowing glass. But over time, I started to view these moments differently. They weren't about her or me, they were about Liam and Emma. I reminded myself of that every time my anger flared. One particularly tough moment came during Liam's soccer game. It was the first time Sarah and I had to be in the same place as co-parents instead of a couple. She sat on one side of the field with a few other parents, while I sat on the opposite side, trying to focus on the game. When Liam scored his first goal, he looked over to make sure both of us were watching. His face lit up when he saw me cheering, and I could feel his joy radiating from across the field. It hit me then that, no matter how much I wanted to avoid Sarah, we would always be connected through our kids. Later that week, Liam asked me, "Why don't you and Mommy sit together anymore?" I froze, searching for the right words. "Sometimes grown-ups don't get along as well as they used to," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean we don't love you and Emma. That will never change." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I realized. "Okay, Daddy. As long as you're both happy." That moment stayed with me. I realized that while I couldn't control Sarah's actions, I could control how I handled myself in front of the kids. I didn't want them to grow up in the shadow of bitterness or resentment. Meanwhile, Jake had completely disappeared from the picture, or at least from my life. I didn't ask Sarah about him, and she didn't volunteer any information. It was better that way. I couldn't care less what happened between them anymore. But one day, I got an unexpected text from Jake. "Hey man. Can we talk?" I stared at my phone, my jaw tightening. My first instinct was to ignore him, but something made me reply. "What do you want?" He responded quickly. "I just want to apologize. I messed up, and I know it's too late to fix anything, but I need you to know I'm sorry." The old me might have called him out, demanded to know why he betrayed me, and unloaded all the anger I'd been carrying. But by then, I'd started to let go of that anger. I didn't need an apology from Jake to move on. I'd already started doing that on my own. I typed out a short reply. "Thanks for saying that. Take care. And that was it. No long conversation, no rehashing the past. Just closure. As time went on, I focused more on building a new life for myself. I reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym again, and even picked up some hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside: woodworking, hiking, photography. The kids adjusted better than I could have hoped. They still asked questions sometimes, but they seemed happy and secure, which was all I could ask for. One night, while tucking Emma into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and said, "You're my favorite person, Daddy." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "You're my favorite person too, Em. Don't tell your brother." She giggled, and in that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't the same person I was before this all happened, and I never would be. But maybe that was okay. I was stronger, more self-aware, and more determined than ever to be the best dad I could be. Months turned into a year, and the dust finally started to settle. Life didn't feel so chaotic anymore. The routine of co-parenting had become second nature, and while there were still moments of tension with Sarah, we'd reached a kind of unspoken truce. We weren't friends, not even close, but we were civil for the sake of Liam and Emma. The kids were thriving, which was all I cared about. Liam had started excelling in soccer, and Emma had taken up ballet, prancing around the house in her tiny tutu every chance she got. Their joy became my measure of success. As long as they were happy, I knew I was doing something right. For the first time in a long time, I started thinking about what my next chapter might look like. Up until then, my focus had been entirely on survival, keeping the kids stable, managing the logistics of co-parenting, and rebuilding my life piece by piece. But now, I felt like I was ready for more. It started small. I joined a local hiking group on the weekends I didn't have the kids, just to get out of the apartment and meet new people. I reconnected with an old college buddy, Mike, who invited me to poker nights with his friends. Slowly but surely, I was rebuilding a social life, and it felt good to be around people who saw me as Chris, not as the guy whose wife cheated on him. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was at the park with Liam and Emma, watching them climb the jungle gym, when a woman sitting on a nearby bench caught my eye. She was reading a book, her hair tucked behind her ears, and she had this calm, approachable vibe about her. When Emma's shoe fell off mid-climb and I rushed over to help, the woman smiled at me. "Parenting hazard number 573, she said with a laugh. "Shoes never stay on during playtime." I chuckled, holding Emma steady as she adjusted her shoe. "You're not wrong about that." We started talking. Her name was Rachel, and she was there with her niece, who was playing on the swings. She was kind, funny, and easy to talk to in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. By the time we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't felt in what felt like forever: hope. Over the next few weeks, I ran into Rachel a few more times at the park. Each time, our conversations grew a little longer, a little more personal. She told me about her work as a graphic designer, her love for traveling, and how she'd moved back to town recently to be closer to her family. I told her about Liam and Emma, about my newfound love for hiking, and even hinted at the challenges of co-parenting without going into too much detail. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to ask her out for coffee. She smiled and said, "I thought you'd never ask." Our first date was simple, coffee at a small cafe downtown, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Rachel wasn't trying to fix me, and she didn't treat me like I was broken. She just saw me, and that was enough. As we started spending more time together, I made it clear that Liam and Emma were my priority. Rachel didn't just accept that, she embraced it. She never pushed to meet them too soon or make things serious before I was ready. She respected my boundaries and let the relationship grow naturally. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch in my apartment, thinking about how far I'd come. A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never recover from what Sarah and Jake had done. But now, sitting there in the quiet, I realized that I'd rebuilt something stronger. I wasn't the same person I was before, but I was okay with that. I'd grown in ways I never thought possible. Rachel and I were taking things slow, but for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the future. I didn't know where things would go, but I was open to finding out. Life had a funny way of knocking you down, but it also had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. And as I sat there, surrounded by the little reminders of the life I'd built for myself and my kids, I felt a quiet sense of peace. It's strange to look back on the person I was a year ago. Back then, everything felt so final, like my world was crumbling and there was no way out. I spent so much time asking myself why Sarah had cheated, why Jake had betrayed me, why I hadn't seen the signs sooner. But now, with some distance, I realize that those questions don't matter as much as I thought they did. What matters is what I've learned and how I've grown since then. The first thing I learned is that grief doesn't follow a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and doesn't care about your schedule. There were days when I felt strong, ready to move forward, and then there were days when the weight of it all would hit me out of nowhere. A song on the radio, an old photo, even a random scent could bring it all back. But over time, those moments became less frequent, and when they did come, they didn't knock me down the way they used to. I also learned that people are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. When everything first happened, I didn't think I could survive it. I didn't think I could face Sarah, let alone co-parent with her. But I did. I found strength in places I didn't know existed, in my kids, in my friends, in myself. Most importantly, I learned the value of boundaries. Setting limits with Sarah wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about showing my kids what healthy relationships look like. They deserve to see their parents treating each other with respect, even if we're no longer together. And while it's not always easy, I try my best to live up to that. Forgiveness is a tricky thing. For a long time, I thought forgiving Sarah and Jake would mean letting them off the hook, like their actions didn't matter. But my therapist helped me see it differently. Forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for me. It was about letting go of the anger and resentment so I could move forward. I'm not saying I've fully forgiven them, but I've made peace with what happened. And that peace is worth more than holding on to my anger ever was. One of the most surprising lessons I've learned is that it's okay to let people go. Not everyone is meant to stay in your life forever, and that's not a reflection of failure, it's just life. Sarah and Jake are part of my past, but they don't define my future. And the people who do deserve to be in my life, my kids, my friends, people like Rachel, they're the ones I focus on now. Rachel has been a reminder that it's possible to find connection and love again, even after everything I've been through. She's kind, patient, and completely different from Sarah in all the ways that matter. I'm not rushing anything, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about what the future might hold. Liam and Emma have been my greatest teachers through all of this. Kids are so much more perceptive than we give them credit for. They've taught me how to stay present, how to find joy in the little things, and how to laugh even when life feels overwhelming. Every time I see them smile, I'm reminded that they're the reason I keep pushing forward. If I could give advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: give yourself grace. Healing takes time, and there's no right way to do it. Surround yourself with people who lift you up, and don't be afraid to lean on them when you need to. And most of all, remember that no matter how dark things feel, there's always a way forward, even if you can't see it yet. Looking back, I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for what it taught me. It forced me to grow, to reevaluate what matters, and to become a better version of myself. I'm not the same person I was before, but I'm okay with that. I'm stronger now, and for the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely excited about the future. One of the hardest challenges I faced after everything was learning how to trust again. It wasn't just about trusting other people, it was about trusting myself. After Sarah's betrayal, I questioned my own judgment constantly. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have trusted Jake so blindly? The self-doubt crept in and lingered, threatening to overshadow every new relationship or interaction. Rachel, though, was patient. She never pushed me to open up before I was ready, and that made all the difference. Early on, I told her about my hesitation to trust and how the wounds from my marriage still stung. I expected her to back away, to tell me she didn't want to deal with my baggage. Instead, she said, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." That simple reassurance stuck with me. It allowed me to let my guard down slowly, to rebuild trust one small step at a time. Rachel became a safe space where I could be honest, vulnerable, and imperfect without fear of judgment. For the first time, I realized that trust wasn't just about the other person, it was about giving myself permission to believe in the possibility of good things again. Meanwhile, Sarah and I continued to navigate co-parenting. It wasn't always smooth, there were disagreements about schedules and boundaries, moments when old frustrations resurfaced. But we managed to keep things civil for the most part. Over time, I found that my anger toward her had faded. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but more of an acceptance. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how I responded to it. One unexpected moment of closure came during a drop-off. Sarah had just handed me the kids' backpacks when she hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Chris," she said quietly, "I just want you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I regret it." Her words caught me off guard. For so long, I had waited for some acknowledgement, some admission of guilt, and now that it was here, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to tell her it was too little, too late. But another part of me recognized the courage it took for her to say it. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "I hope you're finding what you need, Sarah. For your sake and the kids." She nodded, and that was it. No long conversation, no dramatic reconciliation, just two people acknowledging the pain they'd caused each other and moving on. As the months went by, I found myself focusing more on the future than the past. My relationship with Rachel deepened, but we took things slowly, always keeping Liam and Emma's well-being at the forefront. When I finally introduced her to the kids, I was nervous, but they warmed to her instantly. She didn't try to take on the role of a parent, she just treated them with kindness and respect, and that was more than enough. The milestones I hit along the way weren't dramatic, but they were meaningful. The first time I laughed without feeling guilty. The first holiday I spent with just the kids, creating new traditions that were ours. The first time I looked in the mirror and felt proud of the person staring back. One day, while hiking with Rachel, I told her something I hadn't even admitted to myself. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said. "I used to think everything had to be perfect, that life was only good if it looked a certain way. But now, I know it's about how you handle the imperfect stuff. And I think I'm finally okay with that." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "You've come a long way, Chris." She was right. I had. As I look toward the future, I don't have all the answers, and I'm okay with that. Life isn't about knowing what comes next, it's about taking it one step at a time, being open to change, and finding joy in the little things. For me, it's in the laughter of my kids, the support of my friends, and the quiet moments of peace I've found along the way. One thing I've learned over the past year is that rebuilding your life isn't just about recovering what you lost, it's about discovering what you're capable of. For a long time, I felt like I was living in survival mode, just trying to get through each day. But eventually, I started to feel something else: purpose. It began with small steps. I started volunteering at Liam's soccer practices, helping the coach run drills and organize the kids. It gave me a sense of connection, a way to be part of something outside of my struggles. Before I knew it, the coach asked me to step in as an assistant when he had to take a leave of absence. I agreed, nervous at first, but those Saturday mornings with the kids quickly became a highlight of my week. Emma, too, gave me a new sense of purpose. Her love for ballet sparked an idea. I wanted to help her build her confidence in ways I hadn't always managed for myself. I started taking her to her classes early so we could stretch together, and on weekends, we'd play music in the living room and dance around like fools. Watching her light up when she nailed a new move reminded me of how much joy could be found in the simplest things. Professionally, I made some big changes too. For years, I'd been coasting at my job, just doing enough to get by while focusing on the family. But now, I wanted more. I started taking on bigger projects, attending workshops, and pushing myself out of my comfort zone. When a leadership position opened up, I went for it. The old Chris might have doubted himself, but this time, I believed I could do it. And I did. Rachel's influence played a big part in that shift. She had this way of encouraging me without pushing too hard, of helping me see my own potential. "You deserve to chase your dreams," she told me one night, after I'd spent an hour talking about the promotion. "And your kids deserve to see you go after them." Her words stuck with me. I didn't just want to rebuild my life. I wanted to show Liam and Emma what resilience looked like, what it meant to keep moving forward even when things got tough. That renewed sense of purpose extended to my relationship with them. I stopped worrying so much about being the perfect dad and focused on just being present. We had movie nights where we'd eat too much popcorn and fall asleep on the couch. We built elaborate Lego cities that took up half the living room. We had kitchen dance parties to songs they picked, even if it meant listening to the same Taylor Swift track 10 times in a row. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And it wasn't about having everything figured out or reaching some perfect endpoint. It was about embracing the messiness of life and finding the beauty in it. As the months went on, I realized something else. I wasn't just moving forward, I was thriving. The scars from Sarah's betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were just part of my story, a reminder of what I'd been through and what I'd overcome. One evening, as Rachel and I sat on my back porch watching the kids chase fireflies, she turned to me and said, "You've come a long way, you know." I looked out at Liam and Emma, their laughter echoing through the yard, and then back at her. "I wouldn't have made it without them," I said. "Or without you." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing an amazing job." It wasn't the life I'd planned, but in many ways it was better. It was real, imperfect, and full of love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, my life began to feel steady again, balanced in a way I hadn't thought possible after everything fell apart. The storm had passed, and what was left wasn't wreckage, but a chance to rebuild stronger than before. One of the biggest changes was the way I looked at the future. For so long, it had felt like an overwhelming, uncertain expanse, a place where mistakes and heartbreak loomed. But now, it felt like an open field, ready to be shaped. I didn't have all the answers, but I'd learned to be okay with that. Life wasn't about having every step planned. It was about taking those steps, even when you couldn't see the whole path. Rachel was a big part of that. Our relationship had grown slowly, deliberately, and without the weight of unrealistic expectations. She wasn't trying to fill a void or replace anything I'd lost. She was simply herself, and that was more than enough. She brought lightness to my life, the kind of effortless joy that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The first time she said she loved me, it caught me off guard. We were sitting on the couch after putting the kids to bed, and she turned to me, her eyes soft but serious. "I love you, Chris," she said, her voice steady. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, and I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. But I needed you to know." For a moment I just stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't that I didn't feel the same. I did. But I'd spent so much time guarding my heart that letting someone in again felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "I love you too," I finally said, and as soon as the words were out, I realized how true they were. From that moment, things shifted in a way that felt natural, like all the pieces were finally starting to come together. Rachel met Liam and Emma more often, joining us for movie nights and trips to the park. The kids adored her, and seeing the way she cared for them only deepened my feelings for her. But it wasn't just about Rachel. My confidence in myself had grown in ways I never thought possible. I wasn't just the guy who'd been betrayed anymore. I was a father, a leader, a person who'd faced the worst and come out stronger. One evening, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat down with a notebook and started writing down all the things I wanted for my future. It wasn't a bucket list, exactly, more like a guide to the kind of life I wanted to build. I wrote things like: be present for Liam and Emma, always. Continue growing in my career. Stay active and take care of my health. Explore new hobbies and interests. Keep nurturing the relationships that matter. Love boldly, even when it's scary. Looking at the list, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. These weren't just goals, they were reminders of who I was becoming, the person I wanted to be, not just for myself but for my kids and for Rachel. The next morning, as I made breakfast, Liam wandered into the kitchen and tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, are you happy?" he asked, his big brown eyes searching mine. I crouched down to his level and ruffled his hair. "I am, buddy," I said with a smile. "And you know why?" "Why?" "Because I have you and Emma," I said. "And because every day, I get to make new memories with you too. That's what makes me happy." He grinned and threw his arms around my neck, and in that moment, I realized how far I'd come. The future wasn't something to fear anymore. It was something to embrace, with confidence and gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. It's strange how life can feel so broken one day, and then, over time, those broken pieces start to come together in a way that creates something new. Not perfect, not seamless, but stronger. That's how I feel now, like all the pain, anger, and heartbreak I went through shaped me into someone I didn't think I could be. When I look back at everything that happened, I won't lie, there's still a part of me that feels the sting of betrayal. It's not something you ever completely forget. But I've learned to stop letting it define me. Sarah's choices don't dictate my worth, and neither do Jake's. They're just parts of a story I've moved on from. If there's one thing I've taken from this experience, it's that healing isn't linear. Some days you'll feel strong and ready to take on the world. Other days it'll hit you out of nowhere, and you'll feel like you're back at square one. And that's okay. Give yourself the space to feel what you need to feel, without rushing the process. Healing takes time, and it's not a race. To anyone going through something similar, here's what I tell you. Lean on the people who love you. Whether it's friends, family, or even a therapist, don't try to do it alone. There's strength in asking for help, and having a support system makes all the difference. Set boundaries and stick to them. If someone isn't respecting your space or your healing process, it's okay to step back. Protecting your peace is one of the most important things you can do. Focus on what you can control. You can't change the past, and you can't control other people's actions. What you can control is how you respond, how you move forward, and what kind of life you want to build. Be kind to yourself. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have moments where you doubt yourself. That's part of being human. Don't let those moments define you. Believe in the possibility of happiness. It's easy to think you'll never feel whole again, but you will. It might take time, but life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Be open to those surprises. Now, my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I've learned to find joy in the little things, in the laughter of my kids, the quiet moments with Rachel, the sense of accomplishment I feel when I push myself to grow. I'm not the same person I was before, and I'm okay with that. The person I've become is stronger, wiser, and more grounded. If you're reading this and feeling like you're at rock bottom, I want you to know that it gets better. It really does. The pain doesn't last forever, and the lessons you learn along the way will shape you into someone you never thought you could be. It's not about going back to who you were before, it's about becoming someone new, someone who can face the future with confidence, strength, and hope. And if I can do it, so can you.